And good evening. We're live. Thank you very much for being here and for being with me on this full moon, beautiful harvest full moon. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it came up very, very large. Apparently it's a super moon and very pink. And I thought that was very apt for our conversation today because we are talking about women's health and women's business, if you like. And that involves a little bit of the feminine, which is very connected to the moon. So we are talking about intimate health, and my intention for this evening is to give you a holistic perspective on menopausal health and intimate health in particular. And what I mean by that is that it's a little bit of Western science. It's a little bit of naturopathic medicine, naturopathic philosophy and principles. But I'm also bringing the wise woman's medicine in it as well. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I hope by the end that you will, and that it makes sense. We haven't got a lot of time together, so it may be something that we have to elaborate on another time, but it's an important component of understanding the stresses mainly at midlife and menopause. And so I really want to discuss that holistic perspective with you. So let's do that. First of all, I want to give you a little bit of context for menopause and the, because the hormones are changing. Yes, definitely. The estrogen and progesterone are withdrawing, and particularly in perimenopause, which is a little bit before the end of our cycle, there's a lot of disruption. And it can be quite challenging. And then we hit the menopause, which is no more period. And that brings, that period of time postmenopausally brings a whole stack of new challenges. But regardless, we are dealing here with a rite of passage. And the definition of a rite of passage is really transitioning from one status. In this case, we're transitioning from reproductive woman through this period of, who am I? Don't know what's going on. I'm not a reproductive woman anymore. I don't know what I am, and it's this real chaotic, like getting caught up in a wave, being dumped by a wave, this whole process of transition, which is always uncomfortable and is always challenging, and not everyone makes it. And then eventually we move into the next status, the next phase, and that's the 50 plus postmenopausal, different hormones running the show, not so much about estrogen and progesterone anymore, more about FSH and LH. And there's a whole change of brain wiring that goes on in that process. And an opportunity for a new woman to emerge. And that might sound all a little bit vague and maybe even a little bit woo-woo, but this is the understanding of this transition that we don't hear a lot about. We hear in the media all the medical symptoms, which basically makes menopause a disease, and it's not. It's a stage of life and a rite of passage. And I know you've heard that over and over. But tonight I want to give you some snippets of insight into why that is really significant and relevant. Welcome, Geraldine. Thanks for making it. I know we've had some trouble with the links, so pleased to have you here. I'm just explaining some context around this perimenopause, menopausal time. And I'm really keen to give it a positive perspective, because it can be one of the most empowering times of a woman's life. So what we all notice at that time, starting from actually even from early 40s, escalating and ramping up from mid 40s, and then really by 50, you're in the thick of it. And suddenly we just notice everything's changing. Our bodies are changing. Maybe we've gained 10 pounds, maybe can't sleep. Periods are erratic or they've disappeared altogether. We can be short-tempered and snappy. We can be really anxious and kind of wonder what's going on with us. And very often we're looking in the mirror going, I don't have a clue anymore who I am. And I don't know who my kids are. I don't know who my husband is. It's that really unsettling time where everything is shifting and changing. So I'd like to ask you, whether you're listening to the recording or you're here tonight, I'd just like to ask you to check in and ask yourself, how are you going? How are you feeling? If you're here for yourself and for symptom relief and the relief of discomfort and whatever else might be going on for you, how are you doing? Does any of that transition resonate at all? Do you feel like you're handling it okay, or does it feel out of control and overwhelming? You don't have to answer that. You don't have to type anything in. I just want you to think about it so that we can personalize this conversation that we're having about this really tricky time of life. So maybe you have experienced this autumn is occurring. So this autumn, this stage of life is considered to be the autumn stage of life. It is, if you look at the seasonal map and you overlay the seasons of life over the seasonal map, over the even the 4 seasons or the 4 phases of the moon, you can get a sense of this time in our life. It's harvest time. It really is a time for women to reap the rewards of the things that they have built and done previously. Doesn't always feel like that for women, of course, but that potential is there. It's a very potent time. It can be a very potent time. And that's why there's so much charge in it. That's why it can be so emotionally difficult. And this is all important because of the stress factors involved in having a healthy microbiota, or biota is the technical term, having a healthy microbiota, which is basically all of the bacteria living in and around your body. They have a critical role in our well-being, and they live in harmony with us. And so if your chemistry is out of whack, if your pH is out of whack, if you're exhausted and your immune system is struggling, then your microbiota are going to be out of whack, and then you will have vaginal issues as well. They correlate with that. So these factors that I'm talking about, these background factors in the transition through menopause, are hugely stressful, especially when you don't understand what's going on. And so I want to educate you on understanding that process. Now, from a biochemistry perspective, when we became teenagers, when we went into our first period, when estrogen came flooding in along with progesterone and various other hormones, and up it went, and we changed in from this innocent child who was oblivious into a raging hormone teenager and all the things that go with that. If you think back to then, what are some of the things that, and maybe you can even type this in for me. What are some of the typical changes that occur with the flood of estrogen into the body? Those typical things at 16 that occur. And we think that we understand teenage years, we understand what's going on, but it's all driven by hormones, all around the reproduction of the species and the biological need to reproduce. And then that's what estrogen does. It wants us to mate. It wants us to, worry about how we look so we can attract the correct mate, and so on and so forth. All the changes that occur in our teens are really with that intention. And then we have 40 years of cycling up and down, and then in our early 40s that starts to slow down in more so and more so and more so. And then at menopause, when you have not cycled or not had a period for 12 months, then your estrogen is as low as it's going to be, your progesterone is as low as it's going to be. But what does happen, and you may not be aware of this, is that our FSH and our LH, which are two other hormones involved in the reproductive process, they actually increase up to about the same levels as ovulation, which ovulation is the peak time of the month. It's full moon, right? Ovulation is symbolized by full moon and high summer. It's the most active and attractive and free and productive time of all. That's when we're ovulating and are ready for pregnancy, right? Yeah, so those two hormones elevate, and I don't know if you know what those hormones relate to, but the research shows that they are connected to insight and wisdom and intuition. So this real transition occurring at this time of life. Now, I guess what I'm talking about here, if you have been a woman who's been very connected to her cycle and you kind of honored each month the process, if you have studied the moon and the moon cycles and the blood mysteries and so on, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if this is all unfamiliar to you, then it'll be like, what am I talking about? But what typically happens is a lot of women connect to this in perimenopause. Somehow or other, this information finds its way to women in perimenopause, menopause. Unfortunately, it's a little bit late to be honouring the cycle when you're about to lose it or have already. But my experience being a naturopath is I come across a lot of women who get to this stage of life and suddenly they're interested in natural medicine, they're interested in herbs, they're interested in healing, they're interested in food and nutrition and then of course all those concepts that go with it, like the maiden mother Marga Crone process and fascinating things. We're not going to dwell too much on them, but it's important to add that in as something that women in our culture are disconnected from. We don't understand what's going on with us and what's possible with connection to the cycles. And similarly, with a connection to menopause, the narrative out there is negative. Just do a Google search, just have a look around. It's all terrible. Have a look on some of the menopausal Facebook groups. It's all just what's happening. I can't, everything's falling apart. I'm getting fat. It's just such a negative conversation, and it's a real shame. It makes me sad actually, because the highest suicide rate is for women 45 to 49, and second highest suicide rate is women 50 to 54. And when you're going through that transition, you can really understand that it's very disconcerting time. And if we just had this education and this knowledge and wisdom, it would be a lot easier. And so the common experience for a lot of women around menstruation and what's happening vaginally, the primary key emotion is shame. So I know when I first got my period back in, decades ago, when I was 13, I hid it from everyone. I didn't want anyone to know. I was mortified. Gosh, it was an awful experience. And that's not uncommon. It's these days, there's possibly more becoming a woman ceremonies for young girls. It is changing. But for women who are now in perimenopause or menopause, the shame is a predominant emotion surrounding the menstrual cycle and anything attached to vaginal health. And I actually when I was putting this presentation together, I had a whole stack of slides and I thought, I just don't want to give you a whole stack of slides. But I was looking up images, and I, like any of you guys, business owners, if you look up Unsplash, where you can get free images legally, I typed in vagina. There's nothing, absolutely nothing comes up. It's like they've blanked the word out. And so I had to kind of pick images of naked bodies and that kind of thing. So why is this relevant? Well, when you understand mind-body medicine, then the way that we perceive an area of our body or a function of our body impacts that function, has an effect on how free we are in that area and how comfortable we are in taking care of that part of our lives, whether it's actual physical health of the vaginal area or it relates to sexual well-being and sexual function and intimacy. If you have shame associated with your period or with your genital area, then being clear and setting clear boundaries in the bedroom can often be very difficult. And so see how when we start to think of things holistically, it can get quite complex. And so my point in mentioning that to you is that, when I'm about to talk to you about solutions and possible things that you can do and possible reasons why something's not right, but you are a unique individual. You are a one and only. And what works for Mary down the street may not work for you. It's an individual case by case. And that's what's the beauty of naturopathic medicine, is that it's individualized medicine. And so getting the right herb and the right remedy and at the right time for you is really important. So keep that in mind as we whiz through some of this information. And please ask any questions. I love questions, so I love to listen. I love to have you type in your questions, just so I know you're there. So let me just paint a picture of what's possible. So, if you're thinking about sort of early 40s and, we're still in a sort of full reproductive phase, maybe still even wanting to have babies, still capable of having babies, still feeling sexually attractive, we're cycling every month, hopefully ovulating, we've got plenty of progesterone, our feel-good hormone. Maybe we don't take care of ourselves quite well enough. Maybe we drink a little bit too much, eat a bit much chocolate, don't eat enough vegetables or something like that, maybe drink a bit too much coffee, but we've got all this estrogen in our bodies and it's protective and we're getting away with it. And then we move into the next sort of 10 years, and the estrogen starts to withdraw, and progesterone particularly, and our moods can suffer, and that protective effect of estrogen completely disappears. The adrenals take over some production of estrogen, and that's why adrenal health is so important postmenopausally into your 50s, 60s, 70s. Adrenal health is absolutely critical, and adrenal health gets affected by stress. Now, let me just talk to you briefly about stress. Stress is extremely high in that age group, 45 to 55. And the reason for that is, one is, of course, the hormonal transition, which by itself is an endocrine challenge. The psychological journey of menopause is a stress and an endocrine challenge. And then on top of that, women in their 40s and 50s are often getting divorced. Very common time for divorce. They often have aging parents that they're responsible for and may be worrying about or taking care of. They'll often have teens, late teens or early young adults who are maybe a bit off the rails or requiring special attention or making you very worried. And then on top of all of that, this time for a woman, she's often been in her career for 20 or 30 years, moving at this time into more responsibility. And there's also this drive at around menopause to be more out in the world. That's also hormone driven. Men are there with their testosterone is dropping. And so they want to be less out in the world and more in the home, actually. And then women, our estrogen is dropping and our other hormones are increasing or relatively increasing. And we want to be out in the world. We want to be eat, pray, loving. We want to be, starting a business. We want to be going back to university. We've maybe been looking after children for a couple of decades and now it's our turn. And so all of this compounds to create a lot of pressure on women of this age. And that has challenges all over the place. It can challenge our sleep. It can challenge how much time we've got to take care of ourselves, how much time we have to exercise and eat well, and how much time we have to slow down. The ironic thing about women at that age is that, yes, we want to be out in the world, but it's also a time of being more yin, of slowing down, of surrendering, of going more with the flow, being more magnetic. These are the beautiful qualities that can unfold at this stage of life. And how do I know? Well, for those of you who don't know me, I am, number one, a naturopath. I love nature. I love natural medicine. Number two, a life coach. I qualified as a life coach in 2005. I love personal growth and development. I love helping people transform and transition. I have had an interesting menopausal journey from really the dark depths of the dark night of the soul to the point now of working for myself, fulfilling my purpose of bringing women awareness to the stages of life, the women's mysteries, what's possible, finding their inner leader, surrendering, relaxing, and yin and all that stuff. I teach yin yoga at locally here at Virgin Active. Love nutrition. Nutrition's my big passion. Food and the Wise Traditions diet. In case you're interested in where, I think it's important to understand where our when people are talking about nutrition, where their knowledge is coming from, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I can tell you mine comes from Weston A. Price Foundation and the Wise Traditions Diet, which I find to be very credible and valid, and has a long history of evidence-based. And then other things that I bring, I do the live blood, so you might be able to see here, I do live blood analysis, iridology, just looking at all those tools that give us a sense of what's going on in the body, not from a disease medical perspective, but from a terrain perspective. What is the pH of your body? What are the systems doing? How good is your immune system, your digestive system, your your thyroid, those kinds of things. So packaging all of that up, that's another type of holistic medicine. I think holistic medicine is, using drugs when you need to, but using natural medicines and food, number one. Holistic medicine is also mind, body, and soul, or mind, body, and spirit. And then holistic medicine is also Western medicine, naturopathic medicine, and the wise woman's traditions. So I love them all, and it's my pleasure to share some more with you. So how are we going for time? All right, so just before I talk to you specifically about some of the conditions like vaginal dryness and infections and so on, I want to share with you my I suppose it's sort of a fundamental principle of how I work with clients. And I found this information from Stephen Covey. You might have heard of Stephen Covey. He wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and The 8th Habit. And he talks about intelligences. And I love this model because a lot of the people that come to see me they know what they're meant to be doing. They're just not doing it. They are intelligent, capable, amazing women who are stuck with dysfunctional eating behaviors, dysfunctional stress or absent stress management, boundary issues. Maybe there's a trauma or abuse in the past, and there's something going on in their body, and their body's telling them that. They don't know exactly how to work with that. And so if we talk about the intelligences, then we get to see it from a different perspective of how you need to develop yourself in order to be someone who is healthy. Does that make sense? Yeah. Give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you are Dory, Janice, Joanna, if you understand what I'm saying. So the 4 intelligences, one you know already, and that's IQ. IQ, yeah. IQ is intellectual intelligence, and our culture loves IQ. It's very predominant. It's why we go to university and get a degree, and then we earn more money, and then we have status, and IQ is highly valued. EQ, you probably heard of as well. That's emotional intelligence, and that's really only in the last couple of decades started to become more prominent as a value, especially in leadership and parenting, and where you really have to be on top of your emotions in order to be able to be an effective leader or an effective parent. And then there's 2 others. Thanks, Janice. Yeah, the thumbs up is down on reactions. If you click down the bottom of your screen on reactions, you can see how to do that. So the other 2 that you may not know about is PQ and SQ. So PQ is physical intelligence. And physical intelligence relates to the skills that it takes to be fit and well. So have a think about what skills are required to be fit and well. There's things like nutritional knowledge, how to cook, being disciplined, how to discipline how to discipline yourself so that you can do a routine, how to overcome that sort of feeling of not wanting to do something. So this all relates to the ability to take care of your body, and that's physical intelligence. And then there's spiritual intelligence, or SQ, and SQ relates to how, meaning and purpose and integrity and honoring your values. And of course it relates to connecting with the God of your choice, your source, and how effective and functional that relationship is as well. And SQ is a big part of my practice because it's something often overlooked in other systems of medicine. And yet, especially in women as they get older, spiritual intelligence becomes more and more relevant as we age. So just have a think for me for a second. Whether you're listening, as I said, whether you're listening to the recording or you're here with me, just have a think. How are you doing in these? How IQ, you probably know, let's say 10 out of 10. But how good are you at taking care of your physical well-being? How consistent, how knowledgeable, how good are your results? The results are what tell us how well you're doing. Just give yourself a little rating out of 10 for your physical intelligence. And then your emotional intelligence. How calm are you? How well do you manage your anxiety? Rather than sweeping it under the carpet, which doesn't work anymore at menopause. How good are you at that? And then similarly with SQ. And add those up and you'll have a sense, out of 30, say, for the three, PQ, EQ, and SQ. Have a think about what you might be, where you might be at, and where you might be able to develop that somehow as well. So if you're 30 out of 30, fantastic. If you're anywhere less, then there's an opportunity for learning more. All right, so let's talk about intimate health. As I've said, that background information is absolutely essential if you're going to be able to work with not only the physical causes of poor vaginal, pH or microbiota, or poor vaginal health, but in many cases there are emotional and spiritual reasons that things are out of balance as well, and to have that holistic perspective is super important. All right, so I might share my screen with you now, because I got a whole list of things on the screen and I'd like to show it to you. So bear with me. I'm going to play inside the window and then come back to you, and let's move that out of the way. Share screen. Let's see. So what do you see, everyone? Do you see a white screen with black writing at the top? Victoria, can you see my screen? Excellent, great. All right. And I can see chat as well. Yep, great. All right, so we're talking about vaginal and bladder changes generally at menopause, and some of the factors that are involved here that either lead you down the unhealthy path or lead you down the healthy path. And then we'll talk about some of the specific conditions in a minute. So first of all, from an energetic perspective, pelvic congestion can occur. And, you know, in traditional Chinese medicine or in those, you know, more Eastern philosophies, we call it qi or prana or energy. And then it can become quite stagnated in that area. And that's because, you know, if you think about yourself cycling, then you're releasing all of that stagnation every time you menstruate. And that's kind of not happening. So, you know, we talk about a root chakra imbalance or even a sacral chakra imbalance, and the emotions corresponding to those things, whether you're shut down in the hips, even not exercising or not exercising correctly can cause this chi stagnation. And then you get congestion and then improper function. And that can correlate with even not just menstrual situation, but even constipation and bowel issues as well, because they're all connected in that area. It relates to lowered estrogen. Lowered estrogen affects every cell, every function in the body. Absolutely everything is shifting and changing. And in previous eras, when women were primarily healthy, then, you know, this lowered estrogen didn't really have a significant impact. But at the moment, we're going from most, you know, and I'm sorry to say this, but most women out there, their average health is fairly poor, fairly low. You know, maybe you guys who are interested in natural medicine, you have a much better health, but the average woman out there is very well, I won't say very unhealthy, but getting close to it. And so when the protective effect of estrogen withdraws, they're left with inflammation, they're left with poor blood sugars, they're left with you know, improper bowel function and no estrogen to cover it up. So that's why there can be such a hard time. But estrogen affects blood flow, and you have lower blood flow towards the periphery, towards the pelvic area, and that impacts the function. Also, with the changes, there tends to be a slight increase in pH. So we want an acidic environment in the vaginal area, around about 4.5. You can buy those little litmus paper tests from the health food store to test the pH of the vagina if you're having issues, and it should be around 4.5. If it isn't, it'll typically increase the pH, which is more alkaline, and that obviously the diet impacts that, digestive function impacts that, and other things. You know, having too much soap is alkaline. In that area can alkalize as well. So getting the right pH can be quite tricky. There is reduced vaginal lubrication with the changes at menopause, just less moisture. And that can make, especially combined with increased pH, that can make the environment less conducive to the right kind of microbiome. Sorry, the right kind of microbes. And so, you know, if there's a drying out, there's less of an environment for them. And when you've got less bacteria, then that can affect the pH. That can then affect up to the bladder and create bladder infections. And then on top of that, you can have yeast infections as well. So it can become quite a nightmare. What we don't want to think is that the problem is purely vaginal. You know, think naturopathically, in that we're looking at the whole body, we're looking at the terrain, we're looking at the digestive environment, we're looking at the hydration of the body, the lubrication of the body, and so on. So there's thinning of the tissues of the vagina and the vulva with the withdrawal of estrogen as well. And if that area is extra sensitive and irritated, then it's prone to cracking and inflammation, and itching can be a big thing, and then with scratching, that can cause sensitivity as well. As I mentioned, constipation, hemorrhoids, and even urinary incontinence can relate back to these issues. And vaginal atrophy affects around 50% of women postmenopausally. And, it's easy to say that it relates to just estrogen, but it's not just estrogen. What is affecting estrogen? Let's get curious about that. If the adrenals are meant to be taking over some of the production of estrogen, what are the adrenals doing? What's stressing that person out? Are they sleeping? Why aren't they sleeping if they aren't sleeping? Sometimes we don't sleep because we're troubled, because we're not happy in our lives, because we're not on track with where we're meant to be. We're in a job we hate. We're in a relationship that's unhappy. And so, it's easy to just say, oh, it's an estrogen problem, and it's much more complex than that. Yeast infections we're going to go into in a minute. So what we know to be the case is that if you have a natural menopause as opposed to a chemical menopause or a hysterectomy menopause, if you nourish the kidneys and the adrenals, that means with foods and herbs and yin things like yin yoga, breathing and meditation, that sort of, it's a kind of type of slowing down where you start to allow and surrender and magnetize things to yourself. This is kind of women's wisdom stuff, which is absolutely amazing. And you need sufficient body fat. If you're too skinny and don't eat sufficient fat, then you'll have trouble with hormone balance. Then that combination will lead you to the least amount of problems associated with menopause, and particularly the vaginal and bladder changes. So, any questions? Pelvic congestion. Is that a question, Yemi? It's a kind of Eastern medicine concept. They talk about stagnation and coolness and damp and heat, and all these kinds of things are more traditional systems of medicine ways of thinking. But basically it just means that things aren't flowing properly, and it starts with the energy. And where energy goes, blood flows. So if the energy is congested, it could be just hip opening postures in yoga. It just opens everything up. Hip opening postures are great for all of this stuff that we're talking about tonight. And no more questions. All right. So let's have a look at dry vagina. Some of this we've already discussed. Lessening of sexual lubrication is normal. Absolutely normal. And in my beautiful book that I have by Susan Weed, she talks about grandmother wisdom, and she talks about that you're no longer on tap, basically, that you decide now when you switch on, and then it takes time, and it takes concentration, and it takes being connected in your body and feeling sexy. That's a whole different conversation, right? More conscious effort required for lubrication. Intimacy and love must truly be present. And then you take it slowly. And if that things are not going well, then you can get cracking and irritation and itching can occur. And itching can be from the dryness. It can be from that the tissues becoming thinner, and it can be lack of moisture in the body. So vaginal care is absolutely required, and all of those things that upset the microbiome really need to be reduced. So all chemicals, fragrances. We use a lot of personal care products that have artificial fragrances in them. I recommend getting rid of all of those. And I've just whacked here all the treatments for dry vagina, and they're really exciting, really amazing. Yoni Steaming, if you would like to consider sitting yourself over a steaming bath that's got all herbs in it, that's an amazing process. Just jump onto Pinterest and Google Yoni Steaming or vaginal steaming, and there's dozens of recipes that come up for herbal combinations, rose petals, and you can buy those herbs in a health food store. And the steaming and the herb combination can be viewed beautifully. Either you're trying to reduce inflammation and irritation, or you're trying to reestablish some functioning again. Obviously, water intake and fat intake are super important, and it's the right kind of fats, the right kind of essential fatty acids are important. Yoga, because yoga opens up the chi and reduces the congestion and the stagnation in that area. Hello, Julie. There's some homeopathics, depending on the severity. If it's super burning, itching, then you might go for belladonna or bryonia. There's a few typical homeopathics that can be prescribed. And then sitz baths. Sitz baths are where you have a bath, either a shallow bath in your bathtub, or you have a special tub and you just sit your bottom in that, basically. And you can put fresh herbs into that, comfrey being one of them. Another one is plantain. Ointments, chickweed and plantain, great potential ointments. I have also recommended essential oil creams. So, clary sage is a very popular one. You don't want to overdo it with the sages, though, because they are drying. So it's not for everyone. Like I said right at the beginning, this is individualized medicine. Acidophilus capsules may help lubricate, and especially if there's a yeast problem. And exercise is definitely beneficial in lots of ways. Not the least of which is stress management. But you do need to be careful with exercise, because exercise for women at menopause is different to exercise for women in their 20s and 30s. There's more care required, more softness, more. You don't want to flog yourself on the running machine for an hour. That's just going to activate cortisol levels and stress out your adrenals. So exercise, we have to shift our mindset around exercise as well. Can you make your own essential oil cream? Absolutely. Buy yourself a base. I mean, you could put it in a coconut oil base if that doesn't irritate. There's even just olive oil or a jojoba oil. I use a base where it doesn't all absorb in, so it puts a barrier, protective barrier over it, and helps to hold the essential oils there for a little while. But yes, obviously it's a very sensitive area, so you'd never put essential oils on neat, and you'd have to find yourself a good recipe. Yes, coconut oil is great. Not for everyone, though. Coconut oil is not for everyone, and not for all seasons of the year. If you speak to the Ayurvedic practitioners, they don't use coconut oil all year round. Hormone replacement therapy is always an option. but from my perspective, it's the final option. There are about 10 steps to go through before that you get to that point. And in my opinion, because once you're putting artificial hormones on your body, then there's risks associated with that. And I know that they say that they're safe and they're all that kind of thing. But from my perspective, and from the wise woman's tradition, you connect with your body first. You understand the messages. You find out about what that area means to you. You breathe. You look at the reasons why you're out of balance. You correct those. That they are, to me, the wisdom of the body and the things that connect you to being a woman and enable you to move into an empowered woman state into your 50s and 60s, rather than being, artificially stimulated by fake hormones. And there is no natural HRT. There's nature identical hormones, but they're still synthetic. They're still synthetic. So don't there's no problem in using them, but in my opinion, it's the last resort. That's my point. All right. Let's have a look at itching, burning, and vaginal atrophy, which is kind of like the next level of intensity, of seriousness, of out of balance. And irritating alkaline vaginal secretions on tender vaginal tissues. It's fundamentally what we're dealing with here. And so there are certain conditions to be ruled out. Lichen sclerosis is very common, and other conditions that are autoimmune. There's Sjogren's syndrome, which is dryness. There's a lot of potential immune conditions to be ruled out. We're separating here yeast infections or candida from what we're talking about. I'm talking about those next. But obviously, yeast infections can create burning and itching and so on. So they need to be ruled out, and they're not uncommon. And then there's the psychological, spiritual, psycho-spiritual context for all of this as well. And, the mind-body connection. Are you itching to do something? Are you holding yourself back? Are you denying your desires? There's all of those things. And they're hard questions to answer. And I think typically you work with somebody to do that stuff. Do you have a suppressed burning desire? And here's the list of potential treatments. Once again, they're similar. Homeopathics can be amazing, especially as a very, homeopathy and the breathing and yoga. These are kind of least intervention medicines, and they're energetic medicines in a way. So the wise woman's approach is to start with the least amount of intervention. Even herbs can be stimulating and heroic in some ways. And so, there's sort of this gradual intensity of the treatment depending on how serious the condition is. Once again, ointments can be used. Pelvic floor exercises will help establish some opening of that area, blood flow, and so on. Nettle tea works for some people. Can be very, a cup a day for nettle tea. And then there's all the gels and honeys and oat baths for symptomatic relief. Oat baths are amazing. And then looking at mucous membrane health. And mucous membrane health requires good fats. And by good fats, I mean a nice combination of good animal fats like butter and ghee and cod liver oil and liver and egg yolks and fish eggs and all these beautiful sources of saturated fats, and then the unsaturated or the polyunsaturated fats as well. So your cold-pressed flaxseed oil. Cold-pressed flaxseed oil is great, has slightly estrogenic effect. Medicinally, I use cod liver oil. And most of my clients go on cod liver oil instead of fish oils. And the latest research that I've come across is on the sea buckthorn, Mongolian sea buckthorn oil, which is an essential fatty acid based oil that has an affinity for mucous membranes. Mucous membrane health is absolutely essential. If you don't have good mucous membranes in the chest, you'll have lung infections. If you don't have it in the digestive system, you'll have gut issues. And if you don't have it in the vaginal area, then you're very likely to be exposed to infections and things that get in that shouldn't. Questions? Yes. Okay. And finally, we're talking about yeast overgrowth. I can see it when I do live blood. There's certain signs that come up from current infection and even previous infection. I often get the yeast signs, and I'll ask the person, do you currently have Candida? And they say, oh, I had it years ago. But there still seems to be this kind of tendency to that floating around. Obviously, that infection can cause irritation, sensitivity, itching, soreness, and potentially incontinence as well. It's about the alkaline environment. pH is too high, and this corresponds with the changing of the hormones, amongst other things. Other things you have to be aware of is that HRT can promote candidiasis or a Candida overgrowth. Diabetes, being a blood sugar problem, can feed the wrong bacteria. Antibiotics, of course, wipe out all your good bacteria and can cause the yeast to flourish. And things to note, if you've had it and you've maybe still got it and you're struggling to get rid of that all partners have to be treated as well so that you don't reoccur. And I remember years ago working with an environmental medicine practitioner, and one of the things that he would always recommend to Candida patients, and there were a lot of them, was you have to make sure that your underwear is cotton, and that the underwear is washed in high temperatures and ideally exposed to the sun, so that the UV light kills the yeast that could potentially be trapped in the underwear. So there's all these things that are important. And from a mind-body medicine perspective, Candida is quite I was going to say the word convenient, but that it's not exactly the word I mean. But there can be hidden benefits to having an infection, and it often has a lot to do with not being able to say no to sex. So some of the mind-body emotional intelligence work that might need to be done around this is learning to say no in a relationship to sex, maybe, and asking for what you need intimacy-wise. And then, similarly in postmenopause as well. So some of the things to consider for treatment, which can be very effective, Acidophilus pessaries. Some people use real yogurt, and yes, you can get it up there. It's a bit messy. There's certain yogurt sitz bath recipes that you can find, yogurt diluted in water. Obviously, the diet is very essential. Apple cider vinegar, because apple cider vinegar and lemon juice, these things being slightly acidic, can be helpful. Garlic being antimicrobial, so you can probably using a garlic clove vaginally might be too irritating, because garlic is quite heating. but certainly using it in the diet if you can tolerate it. If you can't tolerate it, then possibly you need some liver gallbladder detoxifying. Avoiding synthetic materials close to your body, especially the vaginal area, potentially vitamin E and B vitamins and other nutrients that correlate with mucous membrane health again, and immune health. So immune herbs, digestive herbs, digestive bitters, for example, bayberry is really good. Is it bayberry? Bayberry and barberry, very good for getting the gut right. And then there's drugs. You know, there are the antifungal drugs, but they're quite challenging to the liver. So, all right. So I just want to ask you a question then. First of all, do you have any questions? Any more questions? You can pop them in the chat. But I think you can get a sense that there's a lot going on. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of solutions. Where do you start? So, you know, if it's okay with you, I'd just love to spend the last 5 minutes just talking to you about, you know, it could be now, it could be down the track, it could be a friend that needs support. I'd like to just share with you how I work, for your information. And, you know, should you want to reach out and be a client, obviously that would be wonderful. But just so you know how I work moving forward. So just when DIY isn't working, when you've done everything you can do and it's just not working and you just realize you need help, the question is, what's it worth to you? And that can be hard to quantify. It's hard to put a dollar value on vaginal health. It's hard to put dollar value on your health and happiness. But for some people, it directly impacts their ability to earn an income. And certainly it affects quality of life, you know, and it affects relationships. Having challenges in the vaginal area affects relationships. And so mostly people ask, where do I start? You know, how I've never seen a naturopath before, or I've seen another naturopath and they didn't really address it holistically enough, or whatever it might be. So where do you start? So I'm just going to give you my starting package, which is my investigation phase, 4 sessions, and a really comprehensive approach. Because I'm holistic, because I'm old school, I trained as a naturopath 30 years ago, and naturopathy was quite different back then. It was a lot more, perhaps a lot less evidence-based like it is today. Some of the fun things have been taken out, but I like to get to know you. I like to find out about more than just your well-being. I like to find out about your relationships and what makes you happy and all that kind of stuff. And then I like to do my tests. Depends on whether you can come and visit me or not. I can cater to both, but I can't do live blood if you're remote. Most of the other things that I can do, you know, if you're in England or if you're in Queensland or something like that. And then, of course, bringing it all together with your blood tests from your doctor and everything into a plan, so that, you know, that investigation, that finding where you're at. What have you already tried? What's worked and what hasn't worked? What does your doctor say? You know, what does your blood look like? All those things are really important before determining which herb you need, which nutrient need, which dietary recommendations you need, and to make sure that your, you know, that the prescription is tailored for you, not for some average woman. Average 50-year-old woman gets, you know, the same treatment as every other woman. No, it doesn't work like that. It's personalized medicine. And we also touch on then if there's things in the way that are more of emotional, because then there's more homeopathics that can be used, or bark flowers, certain herbs, the dosage can change. So I have the benefit of being trained in both mill dosage herbal medicine and drop dosage herbal medicine. So they work a little bit differently. It's my Vibrant Health Essentials package, your personalized assessment, a comprehensive understanding of physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, all those PQ, EQ, SQ we talked about. I document all your results in the report. You get an individualized, strategic, step-by-step achievable plan. I give that all to you so that you can decide then whether you want to continue working with me or you want to DIY it yourself. Set price, set time, no surprises. And, the other beauty of it is that, along the way, we've already been trying a few different things. And so I get to see what is working for you and what kind of level of skill you have in those kinds of things as well. So yeah, it's your first step to transformation, isn't it, Victoria? And that's valued at over $1,200. It's very intensive. There's a lot of time. There's reports and organizing your doctor get blood tests, and you doing your diet diary and evaluating your diet, all that kind of stuff. And it's lots of fun. It's normally priced at $697. It's all packaged up for $697, paid up front. But for you guys and for anyone listening to the recording, I'd like to offer you a special discount of $100. And you just need to email me directly and let me know that no one else knows about this unless they've watched the video. So if you're watching this in a month's time and it's still valid, just email me and I'll honor that for you. But it's 48 hours from tonight. And the first step is, you don't even need to decide really. The first step is a free half an hour consultation with me called Passage to Power session. And we discuss your particular circumstances, and then the bonus still applies, and then you get to choose whether you want to continue or not. And that's actually valid just till the end of today's webinar. The $100 off is like a super, super urgent bonus. If you're ready to go, I will offer you a $100 gift voucher if you kind of email me straight away and before we finish. So there's the link. If you'd like to directly book in for that Passage to Power session, you can go into my calendar and book a session, or email me and we can do it together. And I do have a retreat coming up in October, which will be a combination of all the mind-body transformational wellness work that I do. I have a team working with me on that. So that's my little ad break. I'd love for you to consider that doing it on your own may not work for you, that getting yourself intelligently taking care of your physical body, working in the emotional components and the spiritual components, I don't know anyone that can do that on their own. We all need a guide when it comes to working on ourselves and transformation. So I'd love to be your guide. All right, so just while you're thinking, I've just got to show you a couple of images for fun, things that we can see in your genetics that relate to perhaps a predisposition to maybe gut issues. So for this iris, for example, you might see this sort of grayer here in the stomach regions, the light grey, which indicates underactivity. And then this whiteness here is overactivity. So this person has an issue with acids in the body. And those people can be prone to Candida because of an under-acidic stomach, leading to an poor pH or improper pH in the digestive system. So things like that are really important for us to see. This is a brown iris, and you can see here cramp rings. Cramp rings indicate a predisposition to tension in the body. And that could affect gut health because of tension in the gut. It could mean an increased requirement for calcium and magnesium. And these things can impact adrenal health. There's another one with those cramp rings that you can see. This is a body composition test that I do to ascertain your cellular health, and that can be quite informative as well. It's a sort of gives me a sense of how nutritionally nourished you are, how healthy your cells are. And then the last slide I've got here is the live blood, which I mentioned earlier. And you can see the different things you can see on the left-hand side there. There's live blood with the red blood cells, and the blue thing is a white blood cell. And then on the right-hand side is the dried blood. And see how it dries in patterns? All of that means something. All of that tells us something about your biological terrain. It's not diagnostic of diseases. It just gives us a sense of what might be happening in your body. Maybe things you don't know about already, but also maybe the reason why you've got the issues that you've got. So, all right, lovely ladies, let me stop share. And yeah, you're from the UK. Yeah, I understand. Get back to work. Thank you. I will be sending out the recording tomorrow. Yeah. Welcome, Julie. It's lovely to be. You did miss the beginning, but you will get the recording. And I'm not quite sure why we've kind of stuck on Dory. Let me spotlight myself here. So thank you for your attention. I am here for another couple of minutes for any questions, but always available offline for questions. If you'd like to email me, I'm happy to answer, and happy to have that half an hour free session, even if you're not sure whether you're interested in working with me, just to answer questions and guide you in the right direction. So thank you, ladies. Thank you, Victoria, Dory, Mary, Myth, and Geraldine, and Julie, and Yemi, and so on. So I appreciate your time. Good night, everyone. Take care.